Good morning. Welcome to the Creative Industry Summit Series. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tamara Coffey, the Arts Program Branch Manager for the Kentucky Arts Council. The Creative Industry Summit Series is a collection of webinars and online workshops that focus on celebrating Kentucky artists and on the business of art with topics for artists, arts organizations, educators, and others. To learn more about the series, go to our website at artscouncil.ky.gov. Most of our webinars are recorded and can be viewed on our YouTube channel. We've done several this year, so look for those. And we also have webinars from previous years, so I'm sure you'll find topics of interest. During the webinar, we're going to leave the chat open. Feel free to add your questions for the presenter. We'll also post some links in the chat in case you're looking for things like people's websites and the YouTube channel link and things like that. But let's get started. So we're really excited today to bring you today's webinar, Finding Funding Grant Search Basics. This session will offer practical strategies for discovering and organizing grant opportunities using free, publicly available tools and databases. You'll learn how to locate open calls, interpret eligibility guidelines, and build a simple system to track opportunities that align with your creative or organizational needs. The session will focus on sustainable, no-cost methods to strengthen funding, research, and planning. Our presenter today is Dr. Winter Phong. She is an assistant professor of arts administration at the University of Kentucky with an expertise that includes strategic planning, fundraising, financial management, and community arts practice and engagement. Dr. Phong has taught courses in arts management, financial management, fundraising, and arts leadership. Her work emphasizes practical solutions that support long-term sustainability and ensure broader participation and financial resilience in an evolving cultural landscape. Please welcome Dr. Phong.
Hello, I'm Dr. Winter Fong. I'll go ahead and share my slides here in a second. But just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do want to ask a question, and we're at a point in the slide where it makes sense to ask a question, I'm happy to have questions while it looks like we're not too big of a group so far. So please do ask questions. And then feel free to put questions in the chat, and there will be time available at the end to sort of come back and look at questions as well. And as we go through these slides, there'll be moments where I'll sort of pause and give you a chance to sort of process and digest. But if you would like the slides, I'm happy to share them with you all so that you can have them after, so you don't feel like you have to do screenshots or snap pictures or anything like that, that the slides will be available to you after the presentation. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, there we go. All right. If I can get a thumbs up that we're seeing the slide okay. And I do have my captions on. It's not perfect in its captioning, but there should be ability to see some captioning in the slides as well. So today we're going to go ahead and today we're going to look at our finding funding basics. And we're going to specifically sort of look at different things and details that might be important for us to consider as we're developing or increasing the development of our grant searching. So the first thing that we're going to look at is what we're going to cover today. So what we're going to sort of look through and talk about as we go through this topic. We want to be able to identify several free places to search for grant opportunities, because that's always going to be important. Finding resources that are low cost to us. And when I say low cost, I still appreciate that it takes your time to do this work. So it's not really free, but the sites themselves are free to look at. And then also consider basic fit criteria. So thinking about the different things that you are, that might match your organization or that are going to be beneficial to you for searching for funding. We're going to talk about reading guidelines without getting lost in the details. So specifically, what are the types of information that we want to look at? and what kinds of things is that going to tell us, and what should we consider as we go through. Um, Finally, we're gonna continue on and think about a grant tracking system. So specifically, what type of things do we want to track as we're following grants? And we'll talk a couple of tips in there as well. And then we want to create a regular habit of checking, saving, and returning to possible opportunities. And then I just wanted to sort of note and make clear, not applying can actually be a successful outcome as you're going through the grant process. In particular, finding if something is a good fit for you, but might not be the right timing, but there's different things to consider as you're preparing and building your grant capacity. So, big shift in sort of our thinking is we're sort of shifting from chasing funding, because a lot of times we're like, oh, I have this program I need funding for. So instead of thinking about finding funding or looking specifically at funding and finding a specific thing to match something that you're already doing, we're going to create habits and practices that will sort of keep in mind regular funding that can help support us throughout. So it creates more of a sustainability mindset in something that we're not trying to find funding to help cover something that is sort of an emergency, but instead that we're creating a systematic way of looking and preparing applications and thinking about grants. And then finally, grant research is ongoing. It's not crisis driven. And it's something that we have to sort of continue to consider, and we have to think about insights and future planning. We want to take a sustainable approach. That means checking opportunities regular, saving possibilities, and building knowledge over time. Even if an opportunity is not right this year, it may reveal a funder deadline cycle, priority area, or language pattern that becomes useful later. So we really want to think about, where are we currently hearing about grants? Where are we seeing them? What are the different ways that we're connecting? And sort of think about that as we're shifting into creating a stronger grant writing practice. So this is a big list, and we'll break down some of these. What counts as a grant opportunity? So what are the types of things that I'm talking about today? Sort of the ones that might be most familiar to us are going to be government grants or foundation grants. We also have community foundations. So these are public collections of funding that help support our specific communities. Larger corporations or businesses will have foundations that are connected to them. So if you can think of a large corporation, chances are they have a foundation, and those foundations are often separate from the corporation itself. So you're going to want to be able to look at that foundation website, not just searching for that particular corporation, but specifically looking for their foundation. And we have several of those in Kentucky that we'll sort of look at later. Business community support. So you're going to have businesses that support your local community that maybe aren't corporation level, but are large businesses. Arts agencies. So we have different levels that we're going to sort of think about. And that's our federal, which is the National Endowment for the Arts. We have our state arts agencies, but in between there, we have our regional. So we have different regional arts agencies across the country, and those are actually meant to share and create opportunities. So you may see a chance to collaborate or work with another arts agency or regional agency. So it's always important to try to keep that scope of looking a little broader. But for us, in particular, we're going to be looking at South Arts as we're coming in and finding that regional. And then we're going to have smaller and smaller agencies all the way to community, county, city, and those are going to vary. And you might have some that are tied into actual government agencies. So some could be associated with Parks and Rec, or some might be associated with development agencies. It just is going to depend on your community and how those things sort of came out and who within an agency is supporting the arts. You're also going to see humanities, tourism, education, preservation, all different kinds of agencies within your communities that are going to sort of focus on the things that are important, and you can find funding through those avenues, through different calls or grant applications, and that's going to change on a somewhat regular basis. But there's also strategy we'll talk about on how to keep those things on your radar. There's also artist-specific grants. So if you're an individual artist, there's going to be grants that are related to your discipline, or there's going to be grants that are related to the type of art form that you practice. And there's different ways to look at that. There's also some arts emergency grants that are specific to individuals. So if you encounter an emergency, there's funding that is available for that. And then finally, there's opportunities for residencies that do have funding attached. So these are going to be grants that you might travel to a different community, or you might travel to a different state in order to do arts practice. And there's several of those grants that are available in the US and internationally that individuals can apply to. So those are sort of different places that you might find what we consider a grant opportunity. So the first rule of grant search is fit comes before writing. We want to make sure that if we're applying for a grant, that it's going to be a good fit for us. So we sort of want to think about what are the different elements of fit and how those come together. I'm not going to go in depth with every single one of these things, but we'll sort of touch on them all. But the first is subject area. So some grants are going to be very specific about what type of art practice that they fund. So it could be arts education, public art, creative placemaking, humanities, accessibility, tourism and cultural heritage. So that's going to be a really important cue for us to pay attention to if that's something that's going to match what it is that we do as an organization. We want to make sure that we're doing those things and finding that right fit for our subject area. So what are we specifically doing and looking to fund? And then in terms of location, that can be another big fit factor is geography. So specifically, is this something that's available to me in my community? Is it a local grant? Is it regional? Is it rural? Is it within a national scope? Is there an expectation that I am located in a particular place? So those are going to be things that we want to check as we go through the grant criteria or eligibility requirements that will help us. But those two things are big factors that let us know whether or not we should even continue to look at this grant, or if we should sort of put it into that cycle of let's keep track of this and look at it later, or if it's something that we're just going to go ahead and push aside and say, not right now. That's not necessarily a match for us. And you can even note that if you have a grant tracker, and we'll talk about that later in this conversation. But if it's something that doesn't match your organization, you can identify that so that you don't have to do that work later and say why it wasn't a good match for you. Eligibility. So this could change year to year. So I think it's important when you're looking at it for fit, definitely look at it. But you can always come back to a grant that matches your geography, matches your subject area, because each organization is going to have new grant initiatives every year. And that includes our state, all the way from our state arts agencies to individual foundations, who, depending on leadership, might change the specific thing that they're funding. The next thing to consider that's a major factor in whether or not something's going to be a right match, a right fit, is the type of support. So if you're looking for a specific type of support, so if you're looking for something to help you with operating expenses, or if you're looking for something that's program specific or project specific, that's going to be a big criteria for the funder to know whether or not that they should sort of match and find funding with that. Additionally, amount. You might have a particular need or capacity need. And if there is a matching requirement, so if you have funds that you're putting in from your organization and you can't make that match, that amount is going to be too difficult for you to reach. And that's something to sort of look at and consider. If those are your local and state agencies and you find that regularly you're outside of that, that might be a point to start a conversation too with those agencies to say, hey, I would love to be able to apply. Here's the kind of work that we're doing. Would there be a chance for an opportunity in the future because you are a member of that community and they want to serve their community with those funds? The next is timeline. Is the timeline realistic for you? Does it match the timeline of the thing that you think you might want funding for? Relationships are important. And then capacity. This one I think is really important to consider, especially if you think about all of the work that you have to do when you're fundraising and finding support, and you have limited time in your day and limited time in your calendar. But consider the amount of effort that has to come into the application. I think funders have been much smarter and we say kinder about this in recent years. But really thinking about how much time and effort you're going to have to put into this particular application, what match requirements, what reporting, what staff time, what type of things are you going to need? And with that in mind, is it realistic the amount of time that you're going to put in for the funding that you're going to receive? So if you have to spend 20 hours working on something that's only a $500 grant, is that really going to be worth it for your organization? And in some instances, you might say yes, because that could be your toe in the water with an organization and this is your first grant with them, and it might help build a relationship for the future. But it could also be that we don't have time to work on this for this many hours to receive this amount of funding. And that could always be feedback too that you kindly give to your funders, and say, we would love to apply for something like this in the future, but there's a lot of requirements for our size of organization or our limited staffing, especially if this is a new grant program for a particular organization. So there's opportunities within these to reach out and continue to build relationship, even if a fit isn't right for you. But to definitely consider, what can we do? Is it possible for us to do all of these things and complete the application in the time necessary? So these are all important things to think about as you're engaging in that search and looking for applications that match you. So the next thing I like to call plus one relationships. So these are things that are going to help open the door a little bit further. They aren't going to guarantee funding, but they're going to create more opportunities to think about and build funding opportunities. And those plus one relationships can come from board members, staff, artists, community partners, and past grantees. If you're connected with somebody else who's received a grant from this organization or has a history of connection, and they can help sort of usher in or offer advice, that's always something that's really helpful. And I think the past grantees is extra helpful for artists who are applying for individual funding, because you can talk with another artist who may not be applying to that or had received it in the past, and talk with them about what was successful or what was an opportunity. This is another way to network and connect and make more connections for your organization or for yourself as an artist. If you're an organization, all of those connections potentially lead to staffing in the future or even board members that can help build that capacity and build that opportunity. But in our plus one relationships, we really want to think about how we can leverage our network to help support us in our applications. The next is we want to build a habit of looking. So this is, I think, one of the biggest things that is the easiest yet most difficult item to do when you're planning or thinking about building a grant search priority, or when you're developing grant search practice. But this is something that I think is really helpful, and that's building a regular habit of looking. Even if you're not looking for funding in particular, just to take time out of your week, your month, depending on what your specific job requirements are, but spend maybe 30 minutes a month to just sort of scan through and look at different databases, different search tools, which we'll give a list of later on another slide. And then think about, what are annual deadlines? What are different things that you can do to look to help create regular practice for yourself? And we're going to talk about these very specifically in a couple of slides. What are some regular practices that you can do to help you continue to look for funding, so that we're not in that, when we first said, in that note of emergency, that we are moving away from thinking about, oh no, now I have to fund it, Instead, we're creating a regular system and potentially a database for ourselves to plan for funding so that when we do start a new program or when we have a new cycle of programming that we're ready, oh, I have these grants that I know that I can apply for. Whether or not we will get them, that's a sort of a separate process, but knowing that you have those funding opportunities and knowing where to find them is going to be a big support as you're sort of moving through that process. So this is where we sort of want to put things together, even when you do not apply. So when you're doing that tracking, when you're creating that habit of looking, here's a list of things. You don't have to track all of these things. This is my recommended list of things to track, and to also give yourself calendar reminders. So when you're putting things together and when you're putting a list together of who you're going to track, and then I literally will add appointments to my calendar to remind me to come and look at a deadline or come back to it. What are the things in particular that I want to track when I'm looking at those so that I make that tracking time meaningful? So I'm taking the time to really find the important information when I am out there searching and looking. What type of information is important to me? Obviously, the funder name, the website. And I say, don't just keep the grants website, but keep the actual website of the organization, because as we know, people like to update pages or they like to create new pages for each year, or they've got new funding programs. So I will track the organization's real website or their core homepage, as well as any funding pages. If they're related to specific funding programs, I will sort of bookmark those and save all of those, as well as put them into my tracking sheet. But we want to make sure we have their current website, program name, so the name of their program, their granting program, a deadline or expected month. So if it's something that has passed or gets ready to pass, chances are there'll be a deadline for a previous cycle or deadlines posted. We see this on the our federal websites will sometimes have that, or we'll see those deadlines and we can look in our federal databases to see past or historical grants. And that can give us a sense of what's the cycle. And some organizations will actually put their cycle on the page. So they might have twice a year and you just missed this sort of 6-month phase. So you know in about 4 or 5 months you have the chance to come back and apply for that, or that's that type of grant again. What's the applicant type? So are they looking for organizations, individuals? In my case, I work at a university, so public institutions are something that I'll look at. But if you're an organization that's connected to a city government, or you're connected to a library or a school, that's also within your applicant type, is that you're a public organization. You could also be connected to a foundation, depending. So there might be opportunities that you can consider and grants that you might connect with. And you just want to track that information because that's going to help make it that much easier in the future when you come back to that search. So funding range, and this could vary wildly, but to have that range gives you a sense of, oh, $500, not worth doing at this moment. But if there's an opportunity that makes sense in that, you definitely want to include that. Um, what they fund. Oh, geographic focus. So where are they located? So all of those things that I was like, the criteria to consider the fit, you want to include that in your notes tracker, and the things that are going to be most relevant to you to make that determination. And if somebody's not a right fit, but you think they might be in the future, I would go ahead and keep that note. And then we're going to identify sort of why we don't think it's a right fit right now, and why you want to check again, or when you want to check. Maybe we'll check in like 2 to 3 years. Grants is a long game. It's a marathon of finding funding for your organization. So you want to think about all of those things and what's the prep work that you can do to make that marathon a little easier as we're sort of going through. So now for the fun things. I think they're fun. But I enjoy grant searching, grant writing. But these are the free public search tools. So this is probably why a lot of you are here. What are the things? And chances are you know some of these names. And if you don't know any of these names, Here's a wonderful list to look at. But these in particular are going to be search tools that have grants available to them, as well as occasionally you're going to see additional pages that's opportunities that aren't necessarily connected with their organization, but they still want people to know about them. So of course, at the top, we have the Kentucky Arts Council. So they're going to have different grants and different grants available, and they're going to post that on their website. So it's going to be nice to sort of do that regular review. And then Grant Ready Kentucky is another website that you can see opportunities that are available to you. Grants.gov, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Kentucky Humanities. And then within your individual communities, you're going to have your community foundations. So it's going to be good to get to know those. And public libraries are also an excellent resource, and librarians love to search. They love to help you find resources. Librarians can be your best friend when it comes to finding resources. And then the next, Candid Guide Star, I will also say that you can do searching through the IRS website to look at financial records for organizations, but my recommendation still right now is probably Candid Guide Star or a similar type of search database. You can create a free account on GuideStar, and you can also just land on their webpage and do a simple search. But you can actually do that geographic location search. You can do search by organization name, and that'll pull up some information about the organization. And if you sign up for that free search, you can have access to some of the more recent financial records and pull up that information. And what that does for you is you can look for foundations and you can there's a set of options to search for a type of organization. And you can look at your specific state or your county or even your city, and you can find what foundations operate out of your city that maybe you didn't know were there or didn't know existed. So this is an excellent way to find who is in your community. And then the really cool thing is you can look at their financial record, which will tell you the type of organizations that they provide funding to. So there's a lot of opportunity to sort of look through and find information through GuideStar. And a really cool feature is if you happen to be close to Lexington, you can come to the University of Kentucky and sign up for a library card as a citizen. You do not have to be a student of the University of Kentucky, and they have access to the GuideStar database. So through your library card, you can access the pro version of that database and find more information. Unfortunately, you do have to come to the library with your card and get that library card if you happen to be in Lexington, but other universities may have this opportunity available to them, and your local schools as well, your local colleges may have access to these kinds of databases. So those are also going to be excellent resources for searching, is there's going to be some database listing, especially at public institutions, that will help you sort of find, and some of them have grant resources because in higher ed, we're also looking for funding, maybe from a few different places, but there's going to be a lot of great resources. And if they have arts programming, chances are there's going to be some arts detail on that as well. The next thing that I recommend is signing up for regular emails and communications from funders. Even if it's a funder you're not going to be actively applying to in the moment, I think it's really important to look at sort of those major foundations across the US. And sign up for the ones that match and relate to the specific things that you as an organization are doing. If they have funding opportunities, and sometimes they'll share. If they have grants that are being provided through different ways, they want to share that information and they want people to apply for funding. So they're going to be very forthcoming in those communications. So it's always nice to sort of sign up for those and get that newsletter, peruse, and see what's out there. It also gives you a sense of what types of priorities there might be in funding for the year. So if you see an alignment with one of your things that you're working on and something that you're planning as an organization or an individual artist, you found a possible connection to then reach out for funding in the future. And then finally, peer organization websites and annual reports. So, what's an organization like yours, and how are they finding funding? What are the different ways that they're connecting? And you might see they're connected to different local businesses, they're connected to different foundations, maybe even some foundations that you hadn't heard of before. But that's sort of a way to look and find people who are interested in funding your type of work or your type of organization. All right, Kentucky Arts Council's hanging out again at the top of our list. So these are Kentucky-focused places to look. So these are going to be some organizations that are sort of really first point for Kentucky folks to look at and find connection with. Of course, Kentucky Arts Council, Kentucky Arts Rising, Kentucky Arts Partnership, Kentucky Humanities. Grant Ready will have some resources available listed and grants listed. Your local arts councils or commissions, your city and county grant programs. So sometimes these will get overlooked or there'll be a focus on sort of thinking of these as funding different things, but a lot of cities and counties in Kentucky in particular have a strong sense of community. And if you're an organization that does that, or you're an artist that does that with their work of bringing community together, there's going to be some funding opportunities. Tourism, heritage, and preservation programs, there may be unique programs or things coming up, especially if you're in a historic building, or if you're in a site that has long history, that's something that you can look at in terms of how are you bringing community into that space, how are you preserving that space, community foundations, so in your particular community, area development districts. So you'll see this as there's financial funding coming into different areas depending on industry, depending on growth of business. There's going to be some type of development district often or area funding dedicated to that, and the arts is often a good outcome. University or public library resource guides. So these are going to be, like I said, the universities and institutions not only have resources that can help find the national, they also are going to have things that are local. So who are they connected to locally, and how are those things being able to be used to search for grants and find support? So these are some national public funders to watch. There's some that are sort of in flux, we'll say. There might be some variation or opportunities that change. So it's important to sort of keep on these and pay attention. Grants.gov is going to have both the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities opportunities, but grants.gov is a little clunky in its search. It has added an AI feature at the bottom, and those don't always match. So you might not always find the right opportunity or match for you. But I still put grants.gov on here because there's some really unique opportunities that can arise through different areas. And you see later on this list is the Department of Education and the Administration for Community Living. So these two departments or branches in we'll call them departments in the government. They have different priority areas, but both of them will have funding connected with them that you can find in the grants.gov. So there's going to be a lot of different things that might apply to arts and humanities that you're looking for, but they're funded through different agencies. So they're not specifically funded through the National Endowment for the Arts or Humanities, but could connect to your program, especially given the specific connection that you have. Maybe there's something in Appalachia or some priority that's been offered through these different agencies. And you want to be able to find those, and they're all going to be listed on grants.gov. Americans for the Arts isn't necessarily going to list a bunch of grants on their website, but they are going to have a lot of information. And there's also they love adding features. And so there's a couple of fun features that they have on their website that can help you sort of look and think about the different local connections that you're making and how can you leverage your network to then find opportunities for grants. The National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. So this is sort of looking at states. So you might find an opportunity to cooperate with another state and find funding that way through connection with other organizations. Or if you're an individual artist and you work in a region like Appalachia, there's several states that you might look at their agencies to see how are they supporting Appalachian artists, or what's the opportunity to come in and do exchange or to work and do a fellowship within a different institution or organization. And then finally, the National Park Service, Preservation Heritage, or interpretation programs when relevant. So you might find something that's connected with a different agency entirely. And that's why I think it's still important to go in, look at some keyword searches. Sometimes I'll just look at, as part of my 30-minute session, I'll just look at what are the next grants coming up and how relevant are these to me. And sometimes there's opportunities for individual artists or individuals that are really interesting, that could even lead to travel because some consulates provide opportunities for funding for individuals to go. So you might find arts traveling opportunities in there. So it's a lot of sort of interesting things that you might find that just taking that time and spending that regular habit of just looking and then tracking can create new opportunities. And then there's going to be different agencies that you might find on a national scale. For me as an academic, I'm always looking at a Fulbright. And those are something that are interesting to me. But there could be different things that you find that you connect with as an individual artist or as somebody who's looking to connect with different artists, even internationally coming to your organization. So there's a lot of ways to sort of use those opportunities of searching and find something that might match. So here are some Kentucky foundations and major local funders. So we can have this list. So this is a uh, sort of a where to look list. It's not a promise that they will have current funding or that they'll have an open arts grant, but in particular, there's going to be some connection. So for instance, the Kentucky Foundation for Women is especially relevant for Kentucky artists and arts organizations whose work aligns with feminist art and social justice. Their site does a great job of describing their grants and all of the opportunities that they have, and they have a couple of grant opportunities at different times in the year. So that's why it's important for us to sort of go in and look and make that tracker for ourselves so that we can sort of go back and look and create a systematic way of looking. We, of course, have Toyota. Toyota is sort of a big company that's here in Kentucky. LG&E and KU have foundations and they support different things. I think anybody who's near Lexington has certainly seen that Keeneland has supported many programs. There's opportunities for funding through Keeneland, but oftentimes that's going to be a letter of interest, which we'll talk about in an upcoming slide. But these are some organizations, some things that are larger in our community that you can look at. Another resource that I think is really excellent to look at is your local banks and hospital foundations, because they want to make their local communities a better place to live. And so there's going to be opportunities potentially available through them. So while it might not be fill out this application in our portal, there still could be an opportunity to receive a grant. And then you're also going to have your local family foundations that can be discovered through those 990 looking on our guide star, or through your community connections. So really leverage your board if you're sort of an organization who has a board of directors, or if you know other local artists who've been successful in funding, have conversations with them, buy them a cup of coffee and ask them, what are the things that they've done in order to secure that funding. So corporate support is not always a grant. So really thinking about those larger businesses, different things, and corporation grants may look exactly like a foundation grant. So they might have that same process of applying and going in. And but more frequently, we might see something like a sponsorship. So there's going to be some tie to marketing visibility, events, or audience connection. But there's still an opportunity to receive funding for support. I think this is also where you can name businesses that may care about workforce interests. In particular, if one of your board works for a specific corporation, there's going to be a much stronger tie with how they might have volunteer programs or community giving or matching gifts from the organization itself. So you're going to have your employee passion, local visibility, leaders in the organization might have that priority or in the business. Community reputation is going to be important, and if you have values alignment, that's going to be a really solid match. So it might not look like a traditional grant. They could have those, but there's many ways to explore a relationship with a corporation that could bring funding or support you as an institution. And there might be chance for individual artists or small artist collectives or groups to receive funding this way, especially if you have that connection with the organization. That makes it a little bit easier, connection with the business. So when there's no grant application, what do we do? And my recommendation is to, one, read through the language. Some will have explicit, don't contact us. In those cases, don't contact them, but maybe find out if there's a board member who knows somebody that can create that relationship and build that relationship. Others will ask for a letter of inquiry. And there's some sort of elements that I suggest within the letter of inquiry. It should be targeted and brief. We're not sending, a full-on grant application. We're sending maybe a half page, one page, a long-ish email, a short-ish email. You just want to sort of get the sense of what it is that they're asking for. You want to make sure that what your purpose of the letter is very clear, values are aligned, and what's the next step of action? So, what's the thing that we're going to do next to help build this relationship so that we might be able to talk about funding? And oftentimes, I will suggest a clear next step. One, do they have a process? You might ask them for that if it's not clear by their website. But you do see that in their 990 as a foundation, they're funding. You might say, I'm a this type of organization, I'm a this type of artist, and I'd be very interested in learning more about your program. So that could be more information gathering, or it could be I would like to set up a phone call or a Zoom with someone to have further communication. So these could all be different strategies that we do, but we want to make a clear, concrete next step to follow up that makes it easier for that foundation or organization to make that connection with you. All right, reading guidelines without getting lost. So these are going to be the important things to pay attention to, and we've sort of rehashing these in our fit. One, deadline. What's the deadline? That's something that we want to know immediately. That's going to be our number one. Is it something we're looking at now, or is it something we're planning for in the future? Eligibility. Does your organization type, are you, because it'll list if it funds individuals, it'll list if it funds your type of organization or your art form that you're working in. Geography. It might be tied to a very specific county. If you're not in that county, then scoot it right off your plate. Funding amount. Again, that's going to be something that's going to be important, as well as are they requiring a match for that funding amount? And that match requirement is that you have to bring to the table that same amount of money or a percentage of that money in order to receive those funds. Are you bringing that? It doesn't have to be money, but it has to be value that's equal to the same, unless they tell you it has to be money and then it has to be money. So we want to make sure we're reading through deadline. Am I the type of organization or individual that matches this funding? Are they in my area? How much? What will they allow me to spend money on? So these are going to be the most important guidelines that we're sort of looking at and thinking about. And if at any point in time you say it's not a match, you can move on to the next one or put it in that file and say, we'll look at that later. So learning from past grantees. So a lot of times organizations will list who they've funded before. And sometimes this information can actually be more useful than even what they list as their criteria. This lets you know what the priority is or what's the outcome been for organizations maybe similar to yourself or individual artists similar to yourself. What were the types of things that they were asking for and what type of information? You might not get the entire application, and chances are you will not get to see that full application, but you will get to see some details. There's likely to be a bio if there's an artist with specific outcome or what the funding's meant to do. And you're going to be able to see that and see if it's actually a match. There might be some disconnect between the funders or language on their application requirements, but we'll definitely see what their priorities for funding are if we can see who's received a grant in the past, who's been funded in the past. And if it's a brand new application process or if it's a brand new grant, you can still look through their past grants and past history and see how those things have connected and how they've been able to align those. Annual reports are fantastic for organizations. What were the what types of things that they were doing? What's available to you? If it's a foundation, we're going to see in that foundation's annual report more details about those grantees. That's going to give us a better sense of sort of how we're coming at this. If we see the same organizations getting granted time after time, it might be that those have a strong relationship that's been built up. And this is where I might do a little bit more investigation, especially if it's a really strong fit for my or organization, is I might go, is there a connection with the board? Is there that personal connection that's going to be able to provide more opportunity? And in those instances, I might seek out a board member or developing a board relationship and helping that us sort of rise to that level as well. And then language, what type of language are they using and how much funding are they providing? Because some might list that they're offering $100,000, but then you see the grant amounts and they're all lower. Or they might say, oh, this is our ceiling, and they're actually giving more money. But we just want to see what's the language being provided, what's the conversation that you can have through those things that are being presented from what the organization is funding. Our next greatest resource, other than what they produce themselves, is the public records. So using those 990s, so that can be found on those guide stars. Again, if you know the organization name, you can look those up through the IRS website. It's a little clunkier, but you can pull those 990 records, which is the tax filings. And these help you identify different things, but these public records also give us these very strong connected moments. We can see what's the contact for the foundation? What's their address? So if I'm sending a letter of interest, maybe they don't have a website. Some people still do not have websites, but there could be a space for accessing or connecting with, and I can mail a letter. Who are the trustees? So who are the people who are overseeing those funds and supporting? We should be able to see past grant recipients. That's going to be a later section. So be sure to scroll through that 990. But you're going to see the amount of funding and you're going to see the organization, which you can see and read their missions and find out if they're similar to yourself. You're going to see the amount that they were funded. And it also helps us recognize giving patterns. We might see that they give more in odd years than they do in even, or they add new funders that are maybe people they haven't worked with before that are going to be in a different pattern. So that's going to be something that as we're starting to dig deeper and do a little bit of research on an organization that we want to apply for funding, that's going to give us a better sense. And then possible relationship cues or clues. What's there? What's available? What should we know? And what can we find? So, a lot of information I threw at you, a lot of things to think about. But in particular, we want to think about creating a simple grant tracker for information. So we're repeating that information. Who's the funder, opportunity, deadline. So I have a basic Excel spreadsheet that I keep this information on that helps me know. And then one of the biggest things is I give myself a visual cue. So we'll go to the next slide. And I color code. Who's a strong fit? Who's somebody that I should be applying to every year? What's an application that I need to be working on? Yellow. maybe, but there's something that needs to happen before I'll apply to them. And then red, I'm not eligible or I should not return to this grant. And I will still keep those on my list and check them every once in a while, but it lets me know that I have looked at this before and it is not something that I need to spend more time with in reviewing. And from this information, I build a grant calendar. So if it's green, it goes on my calendar. And if it's yellow or red, it goes into that sort of periodic looking or that habit of looking. The grant calendar is both a fundraising tool and a workload management. So if you have multiple deadlines coming up for grants, it helps you prioritize the ones that are the best fit for you and helps you use your time smartly. If you have specific things that need to go through process before you can submit an application, you're going to want to build that into your calendar and you're going to want to build that into how you're thinking about tracking your workload. So it's not just the process of searching, it's the process of thinking about how your capacity, I said that was an important thing, how it's going to fit into your regular cycle of funding seeking. In particular, if you're a staff of half, so part-time is not uncommon in organizations, or if you're an individual artist, this can't be your full-time job looking. So you have to think about what are the steps and processes that I need to complete to do this application and make it a good application and a good application match so that I can, have this time result in funding or result in some benefit. So we want to make sure that we're building a calendar for ourselves that matches with when we can find and support funding applications. We're not just throwing our applications out there or searching only when we need to, but we're building a process and a system that helps us look sort of more focused and very specifically. So we want to avoid grant chasing. We want to be able to think about how we are, as an organization or an individual, seeking funding that matches who we are. And we want to make sure we're doing that in a way that's systematically possible for us. We're not going to reshape our mission for funding. We already know we have a mission and we know what we're driving and we know what's connecting to our community. We're not going to reshape ourselves or distort who we are just to receive funding. That one loses trust. We have maybe donors or people funding us in other ways, and we want to make sure that our grants aren't creating or compromising how we as an organization operate. And we want to make sure that the things that we're searching for are in line with our values. We want to make sure that our funding and our values match because that transparency is going to match to all of the set of funders because you have a huge portfolio. I say huge. You have a lot of factors to consider, especially if you're a nonprofit. What are the different ways that you're bringing in funding to support, and how are you still being held accountable to the community that you serve, the individuals that you serve, who's your patron, who's working with you, the artist that you're connected to. You want to make sure that you're still holding those values strong as an organization and not compromising them just because the funding might look attractive. Or if we, write this one thing or twist how we're doing things, we want to make sure. So the next slide, and we're almost done, is readiness check. So this is a set of questions that you can ask yourself in thinking about, are we ready to apply for funding? Are we ready to really dig into this process? Do you have a clear project or funding need? And chances are you do. If you're an organization in operation, you have a funding need. Do you have a realistic budget? So how much funding do you need support for? And does that match with what you're finding? Or do we need to scale and adjust? Can you describe the community need? Because often there's this aspect of grants that we really want a strong tie to our community, or impact is going to be very important. So we want to be able to describe that clearly. Can we describe who benefits? Can we complete the work during the grant period? Are you able to track the outcomes and report those? And do you need board, staff, or volunteer support? And do you have the capacity? And then again, is the amount worth the time? If you're spending 20 hours and receiving a small amount, you have to determine, is there another benefit other than financial that this is worth the time because you do have very limited time and we're not trying to add more work. We're trying to simplify the work that we're doing and simplify the way that we're searching. So key takeaways. Grant research is not about finding an open deadline. It's about building a system that helps you notice opportunities early, understand fit, avoid wasted effort, and return to promising funders with stronger preparation. Grant research builds readiness and prevents wasted effort. Sort, save, search, save, sort, schedule. All right. Thank you for listening today. And we've got time for questions. If we have questions, I see I have some things in the chat. Let me go ahead and stop my share. Okay. Ooh, I've got some fun tips that are in there. Reaching out, we don't necessarily meet the requirements for this grant, but we want to express interest in case there's something leeway. Is this something that can be included? Yes. So in a letter of interest, 100%. So it could be that you're not as big, you don't need as much funding, or you need more funding than what's available. That's something that says, this is where we align. Here's how we have those values that match. I see that you're funding these things. And absolutely, that could be part of your letter of interest or reaching out to a foundation that says, we're really interested in this. Unfortunately, for state and local agencies, that's not going to be able to be adjusted or changed in that particular year, but I still recommend reaching out and offering that feedback and saying, hey, we're this type of organization. We would love to be able to fit into this funding category. Is it possible in the future to consider this change or shift? And their planning is often a year in advance or more, a year and a half, I think, in some agencies. So they're spending a lot of time in preparation. So with that in particular, if you're sending it to community foundation, family foundation, absolutely put those details about how you're aligned, but you don't quite match their criteria. And here's how what the variation is. So I think that's still really helpful. Would it be helpful to add where does the funder receive their money? So potentially it could be helpful for that in particular. That I think becomes more of a challenge when you're making sure that there's values alignment. So sometimes you might feel less comfortable about the corporation itself or the business itself. So that could be something that's really helpful to you, especially if you're working with a population that has specific care needs or specific requirements, and the funder is maybe not aligned with that particular mission. So I think that's something that could be really important to track. Ooh, I love that we have some resources that were added in here. Are there any tactics or general rules for when we have a project and are in process of writing a grant? Is there a way to approach it that are more likely to grab the funder's attention? So as a longtime grant reader, something for me is that you're following what the questions are. So what is it that the particular, oftentimes it's a box, fill in a box or answer this question, that you're really answering that question. Don't add a bunch of extra language. Don't repeat yourself throughout the application. You want it to be as easy as possible to get to yes for the person that's doing the reading. So you want to make sure that you're making it clear. And then some people will say, oh, use the exact language that the funder uses because that's going to signal to them. You don't have to copy paste, but you definitely want to use their language because that's how they're thinking about it. So you want to make sure that you're connected using their language. So I will use that key term or phrase that they're talking about, and I will identify how that works in our organization or how that works in the organization that I'm writing funding for. And that makes it really easy for a funder to read or to understand. Do we have any other questions? And again, feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask or put it in the chat. if you would like to ask questions, and I know you're putting this recording online, and I'm 100% okay with that, um, send me an email. My email is just my first name dot last name at uky.edu. You're welcome to send me an email to follow up to ask questions or to connect with resources, or if there was something in the slides that you weren't sure about. I am more than happy to connect and provide that opportunity. Absolutely, we'll make sure that those slides are available as well. But anything that you might want to ask for clarity or have information, please do reach out to me through email, and I will do my best to respond to you in a couple of days. Sometimes I'm a little slower, but typically I try to do it within a couple of days for responses for emails. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm super excited to see so many people are excited about grant writing and looking for funding. Always important for organizations and individual artists.
There's a question that just came up in the chat. Are the grant databases at UK available through extension offices in each county?
Yes, so if you can log in with UKY to the libraries, you're going to be able to look at that search base. So if you can log into that, connect with me, and I will even hang out on a Zoom and show you how to look through that database.
Great. Any other questions for Dr. Fong? Well, thank you, Dr. Fong. This was an incredible presentation. So much great information, and hopefully everybody who joined us today is already thinking about how this information is going to help them develop their plans, both arts organizations and individuals, because I think it's important for individual artists to create their own plans for how to raise money to do their art. If you would like to view the webinar again or share it with others, it's been recorded and will be available very soon on the KAC YouTube channel. If you'd like to work directly with Dr. Phong, um, consider applying for a Kentucky Peer Advisory Network grant. She's one of our consultants, and the consultants are available to provide a 6-hour consultancy on a wide range of topics to eligible organizations and individual artists. The consultancy fees are paid by the Kentucky Arts Council. The application is going to open in late June for consultancies taking place between July of this year and June of next year. Check the website for more information. That grant goes by really fast. We get a lot of requests for that funding. In other business, the Kentucky Arts Council is accepting nominations for the 2026 Governor's Awards in the Arts, the Commonwealth's highest honor recognizing outstanding achievement and contributions in the arts. Nominations must be submitted by May 31st, and you can find the nomination information on the Arts Council website. We'll also really soon have the Kentucky Poet Laureate nomination for 27 and 28 open. So watch the website for that as well. If you don't already subscribe to Artsy News, please make sure you do that so you can keep track of the things that we're doing and deadlines, things like that. You can subscribe from the website as well. Look at the very top. There's a place there um, where you can subscribe. Over the summer, we'll be planning the upcoming Creative Industry Summit Series sessions. They'll begin in early fall. If there are topics of interest to you, drop us a note at kyarts@ky.gov. We work hard to develop these sessions on topics that you request, so we definitely want to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us today. The transcript, it'll just be what's in the video, I think. I don't think we'll have a separate transcript. And we will send the slides as well as the link to the YouTube recording of this webinar as soon as it's available. Again, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a good day.